in terms of our state, and I don't know, you familiar with what's happening in neighboring states or communities. I mean, how much of this is increasing? We've got increasing pressure now that's on families with the economic situation, with the mortgage crisis and the home heating crisis. People wonder if they're going to be able to stay in their homes, and people are less secure. And we have the school dropout problem, which is a major issue, a major problem. We have, and maybe Ed would comment on this too, we have many of those who have been in jail, have released, and then in the community. And many of those don't have the kind of rehabilitation background, so they're loose here. The proliferation of guns that are out there. What would you tell families about how is this increasingly a problem? Are we getting a handle on it? I mean, where are we, do you think, both in terms of, maybe you can tell some cities, maybe we're, with the outline that you've mentioned, making some really important progress, have been doing that for a period of time. Other places are kind of are frazzled or it's getting out of control. What would you say?
I think we've definitely seen a rise in terms of activity, whether it be gang activity, youth violence activity. I mean, the other issues, whether it be teen pregnancy prevention, dropout rates. I think for us, the issues of the economy are definitely tied into this as well. We've, over the past 4 or 5 years, when we've seen the drop in the economy, we've seen youth programs, the funding being removed. We've seen the difficulty of young people to have employment. All that.
Does that make a difference?
Oh, it makes a huge difference. Whether a young person is gang involved or court involved or top of their class, every day they come into our center and they'll say, "Can you hook us up with a job?" As if we have jobs in the back of our pocket. It's no matter. It's a common denominator to have that economy. That intersection of the economy and the opportunities that they have, whether it be in youth programs or on their own in their employment, is a huge factor. It's not the only cure. Again, I think it's building those relationships with the caring adults, with the young people, and having investments in youth programs so that those young people who don't necessarily have those resources at home have those in other areas as well to make up for it. In essence, really, how do we level the playing field for those young people that when they walk into school, they're just sometimes at a disadvantage. So,
Ed, what about those prisoners that have paid their dues? They're coming on out now. They don't have the skills. And they're coming into that community. What's happening with them? What should we be doing more? Are there more things that we should be doing with them? Or?
Well, that certainly is a major problem for urban areas like the city of Boston, the city of Lowell. And I want to say that the work that Gwynn and Gregg do make my job so much easier, because in community policing, we stress prevention. And this is real nuts and bolts prevention of crime. It's much better to prevent it than it is to effectively prosecute it. But when you look at the programs that have been available to us, for instance, the federal burn program. It funded a reentry program here in the city of Boston that was very helpful in giving options to these individuals so that they don't get back into a life of crime. There's a 60% recidivism rate in the country, and that means that most of the people that come out of jail will go back to jail in the first year or two. It's really important that we get them away from that life, and so the burn program gave us funding to be able to accomplish that. The whole issue
burn program is one of the federal programs that work with local communities, try to give them help and assistance to deal with some of these challenges. You have that program, and we have the COPS program too. You might mention that. You might talk about that for a minute.
Right.
As well.
The COPS program put police officers on the street, but more importantly than just numbers, it showed them how to do community policing. It showed them how important that prevention and intervention was to the equation, so that if the police are only coming in and simply prosecuting people in the neighborhood, they're not going to prevent crime from occurring. They're not as valuable to the community as they will be when they're given the tools to do problem solving and to deal with quality of life issues. and also to give options to a small population of people that commit most of the crime. Only 1% of the children in Boston are involved in gang activity, but they're responsible for over 70%.
This is really, I think, an extraordinary figure. When you look at 1% of the kids are involved in these activities, and yet, in terms of the crime, they commit
70% of our shootings are gang related. So 70% of the people who pick up a weapon and fire it in the city of Boston are connected to a gang and are doing it because of a gang motivated issue. So it's critically important to make the city safe that we concentrate on these prevention programs that actually work.
You mentioned we have the burn grants, which were important, and then you had the COPS program. We had Massachusetts, I think, got $170 million over 7 or 8 years. That program has effectively, with the administration, been zeroed out, and that is wrong. I mean, we need evaluation of whether programs are working or aren't working. But if you have the kinds of results which you have outlined, and all of you have mentioned, and as experienced professionals, as to the success of these programs, we know that that's an investment into safety and security, and we know that it has worked, and it is something that I certainly am a strong supporter of, have been when it was initiated, and have been a strong supporter of. It's wise investments, and we always sort of think about the purpose of our discussion here isn't to get into the challenges of Iraq, but when you think of $170 million, that's about a couple of minutes worth of Iraq and the difference that can make. And when you think of summer programs for these kids, that we used to have thousands and thousands of children that were involved in these summer programs. So we've seen those all cut back, and the war continues. We find out what we're expending in this. Dealing with these, with those that have committed crime, getting those involved in the community. Let me ask you, Ed, just on a issue about violence, and you mentioned about the issues of guns. One part of the whole legislative process, in addition to the burn grants and the COPS program, is microstamping. And I've got a little picture here of. I think you probably can explain it best, but what the effect of microstamping is and why it's an important tool for law enforcement.
Well, it's extremely important because every time there's a shooting, we go to the scene and we recover evidence of bullet casings, and that's exactly what this photo is of. Microstamping will give us the ability to look at a piece of evidence at the scene and immediately determine from the breech face mark and from the firing pin mark, an 8-digit code that will tell us what gun fired this particular weapon, this particular round. So instead of going back and attempting to determine through striation marks and other very complex scientific means, this is almost like a license plate, so that we can immediately find out who was involved or where the gun came from that was involved in the shooting. It gives us investigative leads that we just don't have today.
And that would be very helpful.
Very helpful.
In terms of violence in the community.
This leverages new technology and gives us the ability to hold people accountable for using these weapons. Mayor Menino has done a lot of work in illegal guns and working with a coalition of mayors, but this is another step. Kids have always fought. There have always been issues that have occurred between teenagers. The problem that we have today is they're too quick to pick up a gun. This has to be a priority to save lives right here in our own country.
Well, you make a good case. It doesn't interfere with any legitimate right in terms of weapons, but what it does do is it helps our law enforcement people make our communities safer and more secure. The cost of microstamping is $1.50, I believe, for each weapon, and what we're looking at is to say that any gun ought to be microstamped, and if it's not, doesn't have the ability to be microstamped, then it shouldn't be sold, and that'll make a major difference in terms of helping, assisting the police and law enforcement. So we have things that can be done. We have things that we can do in the Congress. The microstamping is something I'm strongly in favor of. It will work. The COPS program and also the burn grants. and after school programs. I'd like to talk just for a final moment here about these school dropouts, Gwynn. This is a problem and a challenge. They drop out, then they get involved in gangs, and they get involved in other kinds of violence. You think that we ought to be doing more to try and help? You think that there are ways of trying to deal with this issue?
Absolutely. And I want to start by pointing out some of the great things we have accomplished here in Massachusetts. And to your earlier point, Senator, what we found is the investment in after-school programs gives us a 10-to-1 return on investment back in terms of what we gain as communities and as citizens. So we know what works, and I think that we're facing an increased dropout rate in our Massachusetts schools, and we do need to do more to outreach to a lot of these kids. We have lost some funding, significant funding since 2001, as you pointed out, that supported a lot of our programs. And in the past 2 years, we've accomplished a lot to start turning that around. We've had a legislative commission, the first ever. We want to thank our legislative supporters for that. And we heard a lot of testimony around the state, particularly from police officers about the importance of after school. And we have established a new after-school quality grant program at the Department of Education that's going to continue to build on what we know. So I think particularly for our older kids, as Gregg was saying, we need to make sure that we're allowing them to participate in the development of these programs, because otherwise they're not going to stay engaged. It has to be a little different.
This is we could talk on, but our time has moved along. Good suggestions, solid suggestions of things that can be done, that can make a difference. Those are things we need to follow up on in the United States Senate, which I'm committed to, working with local communities and working with our state. So I can't thank you enough for being here today and for your sharing experience and insight and knowledge. We all know that fighting crime is an ongoing battle, and we're fortunate to have 3 such capable leaders involved in the effort. Working together, we can continue to make progress on these issues. Reduce crime, give our citizens the peace of mind they deserve. Thank you very, very much.